Greetings, and thank you for joining me for the reading of Christ's letters. We're on letter 3, and with this recording, it will be concluded. So this is the last of letter 3. Pardon me. I'm afraid to pause because sometimes I forget to re-record. So I have misplaced the page of the starting of where we're reading from. So it's in letter 3. It's toward the end. So if you go back and look for a row of 8s, we're beginning right under those 8s. And it begins with, many events of great spiritual significance took place just prior to my death. So tonight we go through Jesus' last days from the Christ of Jesus, from the authentic recorder of these events. That part of Jesus that was there, that was conscious of being there, and come back to tell us that this consciousness is also within us as we found it in Jesus. So let's just take a moment to just quiet our minds, still our minds, and just allow all the energies around us to just be there. They need not distract. They need not disturb the peace and the silence of our mind. A mind without thought, without doubt, without expectation, without any judgment. Just that no-thingness. And as we center into that, we may feel our heart beating. I like to think of the heart as like the center of my physical body, the part I'm always aware of, for it is always beating. And that beat goes through every tip of every finger, every toe, top of our head, throughout our skin, everything under the skin, everything within, to every organ. Bringing life energy and receiving what everything no longer needs, and returning it for elimination, for this magnificent process in which we are created. And so we speak of radiating light, because our heartbeat is felt in every single cell of our body to some degree. I allow that beat to go forth through my body, through the skin, and feeling, experiencing its energy of just going outward and pulsating outward. Nothing stopping it, no walls, no ceilings, no floors, no devices, no electronics. The energy of it just goes forth from the center. And this is like the seed of our thought going into the universal soil to bring back the fruits. And so as we know this as a possibility of the Creator within us, we go through this time of Jesus to see how did he deal with these events that took place in his life. Christ really presents it the way it is today, the way it was for Jesus, and the way it can be for us. So, I begin the reading. Many events of great spiritual significance took place just prior to my death, which are excellent examples of the great cosmic laws in action within your dimension, our dimension of existence. So there's a law. That's what we're just doing in that meditation. Wow. I am now giving you a brief account of those important events, since it is my purpose. This is Christ speaking in the first person of Jesus throughout this, okay? So Christ is really reliving this so that he can bring us back with him at that time so that we can see it through his eyes instead of through the eyes that we've been told to see it through. I interrupted myself. I apologize. I'm now giving you a brief account of those important events, since it is my purpose to enlighten your human minds wholly, to give you knowledge beyond any knowledge yet received by any other person in your universe. He says, who else can tell this but me? Everything else is subjective. Everything else is third, fourth, fifth generation. How many iterations of the understanding of the words change and the concepts change. So he begins his story now, and I will read the story. I tend to read it fast because I get into the drama of it, the energy of it, the excitement of it. So one of my participants, one of our community, reminds me on occasion to slow down. So I invite you, you can pause anytime during this if you're listening and it's going too fast. You can stop and pause. I've done that a lot as I read it, so all that is pretty much coming through as I read it because I've read them with such depth, and every time I read them, I get greater depth. Okay. I'm chatty this morning. It's been a wonderful meditation before the reading. When I began to prepare my disciples for my approaching death, it was an immensely difficult task. They could scarcely contain their shock and astonishment. The thought of my being crucified as an ordinary felon was repellent beyond words, and neither did they want to lose me from their midst. I'd called them to follow me and leave behind lives which had been fairly prosperous. They left their families and homes to rebuild their lives around me and my work. They'd taken pride in my progress through the towns. They'd been willing to be associated with me and be known as my disciples despite the rejection and harsh criticism of their religious leaders. Furthermore, they loved and respected me, both for the way I lived my own teachings and the way I had compassionately healed so many people and brought them comfort in their unhappy lives. They truly believed I was the Son of God, capitalized. How could the Son of God end up on the cross? They asked this of each other. Their horror increased with every question. It was unthinkable. They felt a tremendous void opening up in front of them, a void in their own lives, and a huge crater in the earth on which they walked, and a vast expanse of instability and lack of purpose within themselves. What I told them about my future crucifixion, they dared not contemplate. Such an event would destroy everything they had believed in with all their hearts. Consequently, my disciples loudly and volubly resisted what I had to tell them, and stated again and again that such a thing could never be. When I stood firm against their stubborn denials, they were eventually forced to quieten their arguments and outwardly accept that such a thing might be possible. I told them that after my death, they would see me again, and I expected them to carry on the work I had started. The pain and argumentativeness I'd aroused in my disciples also affected me deeply. And remember, Jesus is a very sensitive being. That's what put him onto the search for the true God because of his sensitivity and what the religious leaders were putting upon the people, calling it God. Jesus said, this can't be. It was no easy undertaking to go to Jerusalem, where my fate awaited me. See, he knew this. He knew he's going up to the seat of Judaism. And he knows that his God, so different from Jehovah. More than anything, I wondered how I would measure up to this great challenge of my endurance. Would I be able to transcend the physical condition and enter into universal Father consciousness and remain there until I died? At times I was deeply frightened of the ordeal, but I dare not reveal this fear to my disciples. Very different picture than we get from the teachings of, not the Bible necessarily. They talk about the beating and everything, but the church really increases the drama where Jesus is just saying, I went through this, but the Christ of me, the Father of me, did not experience this. This is the physical thing, the physical. I, the Father, can separate myself from that pain. That's why meditation is so very important, because we can do that. So at times I was deeply frightened of the ordeal, but I dare not reveal this fear to my disciples. Therefore, I began my last journey towards Jerusalem with powerfully mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was weary of healing and talking and teaching people who listened with open mouths and had no real understanding of anything I was trying to tell them. I had thought that my knowledge would enable people to climb out of their misery and at the very least make contact with the Father and gain a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven. I hate to keep interrupting, but I'd like to take us back to them, because the world was thought to be flat. They had no idea of the circulatory system. They had no idea of the laws of nature that we are so involved in now, that we can see how the intelligence of this God being, this God presence, expresses, through laws that are provable. The sun always rises, the earth is spinning, but back then they had none of this. So that's why Christ has come back to say, now you people are aware, you're awake now. You're open to greater possibilities than they could even imagine back then. So, and that's why I spend time with these, because these letters remind me of who I am, and we come together as a community to remind each other who we are. So we talk on our weekly calls about how these letters are affecting our lives. Very, very powerful time. Okay. I had thought that my knowledge would enable people to climb out of their misery and at the very least make contact with the Father and gain a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven, that place of peace, that place of presence. There had been no evidence of such a spiritual awakening, even among my disciples. My disappointment and sense of failure made me glad to be moving on from the earth life to the glorious existence I knew awaited me after my death. At the same time, I wondered how I would endure the pain of the crucifixion. Throughout my mission, I had lived in a more or less consistently peaceful, frequently exalted state of mind, with my disciples focused on the Father love consciousness, author of all being, knowing that I had but to ask, and what I asked for would be swiftly manifest. Would I be able to keep my equanimity when brought before the council, when led out to my crucifixion, when nailed to the cross with my weight hanging from my hands? Because I was now giving way to doubts and fears, the normal level of my consciousness frequencies were dropping. They were taking me down into the frequencies of the earth plane consciousness. I became prey again to my old aggression, prompting me to unreasonable actions I would never have contemplated earlier, when in my former state of total harmony with the Father love consciousness. My doubts and conflicts externalized in my life as human emotions and impulses, which contravened the cosmic law of love. Working against it, but still working it. Working with the cosmic law of love, we're working with it. Harmonious, peaceful, equality, all those things. We're working against it, we're working against, separate from that, working against it, but still working. And it still works fast, as Jesus shows us in the fig tree. So he's just showing us the cause and effect. The Bible doesn't talk about the cause and effect. It just talks about the effects of the physical. But Christ is saying that because I came in this low level of consciousness, I had to attract to me the very thing that I was thinking and fearing and doubting. Has to be. It's the law. And the law does not contradict itself. It always works in accordance with our thought and feeling. Okay. First, there was the episode of the fig tree. I was hungry and went to the tree, not really expecting to find fruit, because it was not the right season for figs. When my search was unfruitful, I cursed the fig tree. 24 hours later, it was shriveled to its roots. It was a shocking experience. It was the first time my words had caused harm to anything. However, it clearly demonstrated for my disciples the power of thought for good or evil. It showed them that the more spiritually evolved a person is, the greater is the impact of their words on their environment. World Peace 2018. I took this opportunity to point out to my disciples that I had thoughtlessly behaved as does the average man or woman, who when having high expectations cannot get what they want. They usually react with anger, fears, hostility, and even sharp words which might or might not amount to a kind of ill-wishing or cursing of the person who has denied them their heart's desire. They had now seen for themselves what my cursing had done to the fig tree. They should now be able to understand that while a strong conviction would bring about anything that they might desire and imagine, they must also constantly be aware of their own mental emotional condition. They must not harbor resentment against others, but must swiftly forgive. Otherwise, they could do much damage to those they resented, which damage would return to them in due course as a harvest of their sowing. Furthermore, as one sows, so does one reap. I knew that what I had done to the fig tree would inevitably return to me in one form or another. I took my disciples to the temple. It was many years since I had been there, and I knew my visit would serve to set in train the events which would lead to my crucifixion. Some of the people recognized me, and in response to their requests, I began to teach them. More people gathered and crowded. This is in Jerusalem, the heart of the Jews. They're already upset. They've seen Jesus come through the walls, coming in and see the mass of people go to him. So they were already kind of concerned of the distraction he's being to their teachings, So they're feeling threatened. So I began to teach those in the temple. More people gathered and crowded the money lenders out, and they began to complain. Their shouting and loud complaints broke my train of thought as I was teaching. Suddenly, my wrath was aroused. Here were people earnestly gathered around me, wanting to hear the words of life, which soon I would not be able to speak to them. And there were the money lenders, who made their living by selling livestock for sacrifices, which did the people no good whatever. These men only brought people into debt and misery. I felt a rush of blood to my head, and I pushed the tables over, scattering their money, and I drove the money-hearted men out of the temple. Very dramatic scene. Now there was a great commotion of shouting and screaming. Some people were scrambling to pick up the money. The money lenders were calling down curses on my head, denouncing me as evil, as one doing the work of Beelzebub, and a thousand other devils. The priests and Pharisees, and all the people who set store by the sacrifices in the temple, came running together to find out the cause of the noise and confusion. On hearing the moneylender's story, they were so outraged by my actions, they launched into vociferous condemnation of me and lamentations to impress the priests, each one making louder protests than their neighbors to demonstrate their horror at what I had done. Such a thing had never been seen in the temple before. Even those who had previously listened to me were now disturbed by my willingness and wondered what kind of man I might be. They were standing close together, watching the proceedings, when they were noticed and approached by the priests and Pharisees who persuaded them I was trying to destroy all they had believed in, preaching a false God entirely unlike anything they had ever heard about in their synagogues. The priests passed on their own outraged anger to the people and convinced them that my sin would contaminate them also if they persisted in listening to my madness. Gradually, the people were persuaded I was an evil influence and should be removed before I could disrupt the peace of the country and bring down the wrath of the Roman government on the entire country of Palestine. My disciples, ashamed of what I had done, quietly left the scene and hid amongst the alleys some way from the temple. When they returned to me later, they clearly showed me they were very angry. They showed me they were sorely tried by my actions. They wondered whether I had taken leave of my senses, gone mad, prophesying my death, and then doing those very things which would probably be the cause of it. It was at that time that Judas, who had never fully shed his Jewish beliefs, began to doubt whether I was the Messiah after all. 3 years I taught the people, and there was no lessening of the Roman rule. 3 years, and people were no nearer the happiness I had promised them. And now it seemed that I was about to become a disturber of the peace, bringing down the wrath of Rome on their heads. Judas heard that the Jewish high priest wanted to get rid of me, and so he offered his services to identify my person when required to do so. When it was time for me to eat the Passover, so that stops there, that's the end of that segment. Come back to Jesus now. When it was time for me to eat my Passover with my disciples, I arranged we should eat it all together in a large supper room. I knew it would be the last time I would have any food on earth. I do not want to return deeply to the consciousness of that night. I felt great sadness to be leaving my disciples who had served me so well. With my sadness came a return of all my fears and conflicts. I had moments of deep emotional self-pity. I felt that no one understood all I had tried to do for my people and the sacrifice I was prepared to make for them. And, the people today, when I was a Christian, I was still in the same mindset of these people back then. I was mad. I couldn't understand why they were doing this. And Christ is saying, that's not what the story's about. The story's about life. The story's about finding the Father within. So he realized this is not the message they're getting. That's why he's come back to say, here's the message I wanted to give then. Here's the message I want to give in 2018 so you can have peace on earth by the end of this year. John was giving a vivid account of the story of the Israelites last night in Egypt before they escaped into the desert. He spoke of Moses' instructions to the head of each family to kill an unblemished lamb, to cook it in a certain way, and paint its blood on the doorposts of all Israelite dwellings, because that very night angels would come and slaughter all the firstborn children of the Egyptians and their livestock. With great relish, he recalled the outcry made by the Egyptians when they woke up to find the bloodied firstborn in every home. None was spared. It was the kind of horrible story I rejected as having any value for anyone seeking higher spiritual truth. I wondered how much of my disciples had really understood when I spoke of the Heavenly Father and his love for all mankind. How could they relish the thought of angels killing the Egyptian firstborn when I had clearly told them that God, the Father, was love? But the Jews had always been preoccupied with the shedding of blood to atone for their sins. So just rest with that for a while, because Christ tells us this is the ultimate sacrifice that the Christians have claimed as Jesus as a sacrifice for our sin, just as the Jews had sacrificed for their sins through birds and animals. And Christ is saying, God needs first of all, God sees no sin, but that's in the rest of the story. Doesn't go into that tonight. Even Abraham, the founder of the Israelite nation, had been convinced he should take his only son into the desert and kill him and offer him as a sacrifice to God, a pagan and revolting thought. I thought of the animal sacrifices in the temple. Loving all the wild things of creation as I did, the practice was an abomination to me. And now I was about to be put to death because I had dared to speak the words of truth. And when I considered how little I had achieved in passing on my knowledge, I wondered why I had been sent on such a mission. So that we could get in 2018. That's my belief. I felt a momentary spasm of resentment and anger, interthreading my usual feelings of love for these men. With some cynicism, I wondered what effective token. Oh, by the way, during the conversation about the sacrifice of the Passover, one of our community asked, "Did I think that really happened?" And I don't know. I know it's recorded. I know that it did not come from God. We attract the thoughts we want. So if the Jewish, the chosen, asked for a message, they're going to receive the message they've asked for. Christ talks about that. The Ten Commandments were just there to get the Israelites through the desert. They weren't meant to be the law for all time. They were a specific answer to a specific prayer. So if the leaders had asked for something, this may be how they were guided. I know the angels wouldn't be, but I know the angels are people. So, who's to say the how? They took Jesus off the cross. They put him in a tomb. 3 days later, this humongous rock that can't be rolled away was gone, and Jesus was gone. Where's the truth? The truth, the physical doesn't matter. It's what is it talking about? What is it telling us? What's it telling us about the truth of who we really are? So, okay, so Christ again has gone back into his lower consciousness. With some cynicism, I wondered what effective token of remembrance I could leave with my disciples to bring back to their minds all the teachings when I was no longer with them. If they could so swiftly forget all my teachings of the Father love and enjoy the horrible story of the Passover while I was still in the room with them, how much would they remember when I had died a felon on the cross, the most despicable of deaths? I asked and I received. Then it came to me that since I was so moved by the shedding of blood, I would give them blood to remember me by. With these ironical reflections, I took up a loaf of bread. I broke it and passed it to my disciples and told them to eat it. I likened the brokenness of the bread to the future brokenness of my body and asked them to repeat this breaking of bread and distribution as a means of remembering the sacrifice of my body to bring them the truth about God and the truth about life, the truth about love. So again, just like I had with the heartbeat, break the bread and come in remembrance of all that I stood for, all that you've seen, the healings and the messages that I've given. And for bringing this truth, I'm being crucified. Realizing I was in a strange mood, they stopped eating, listened, took the bread, and ate it silently. Next, I took my goblet of wine and passed it around, saying that they must each drink from it, for it was a symbol of my blood, which would shortly be would shortly be shed, because I had dared to bring them the truth of existence. I saw that the edge of my voice had reached some of them. Soberly, each one took a sip, and then passed the goblet to his neighbor. But still, they said nothing. They sensed I was in earnest and would not tolerate any more argument. Then I told them that a certain man among them would betray me. Privately, I understood his motives and knew that Judas was a necessary part of the future sequence of events. He was but playing a role which his nature had prompted him to do. I knew that he would suffer greatly, and I felt compassion for him. But these thoughts I kept to myself. When I mentioned that one of them would betray me, and told Judas to leave and do what he had to do quickly, the disciples came alive, wondering if this was really their last meal with me. Now there's a great deal of emotional distress, questions, even recriminations for having led them into such a trap. Again, they wondered what they would do with their lives after I had gone. They asked what kind of standing they would have in the community if I were crucified. There'd be an object of derision, they argued. No one would ever again believe a word they spoke. Deeply saddened by their self-centered response to my predicament, I assured them that they had no need to fear for their own safety. They would abandon me and would not be connected to my crucifixion. After my death, I suggested they should all disperse and return to Galilee. This touched Peter deeply, and he reacted vehemently, denying that he would ever abandon me. But of course he did. All the love that I had felt for my fellow men, all that I had longed to accomplish for them, in this moment of my need, still met with blank non-comprehension, even resistance. Their only concern was what was happened to them. There was no word of kindness, no offering of help, anguish for my future ordeal. How hard was the human heart, I thought. So I feel Jesus in a very low consciousness. You know, all through letters 1 and 2 and letter 3 preceding this, we've seen the joy, the healing, the power of Jesus, the Christ of Jesus. So now, you know, he's reminding, he's not ignoring this from his history, his Jesus history, not his Christian history. Now he's bringing us his Christian history, which he brought forth then too, but again, they were too blind to be able to see it. The work I had started would be promoted from life beyond. I would not leave them. They would know and feel my presence, and this would be a comfort to them. I told them to cling to their memories of my times with them. I warned them that there would be many who would continue in the knowledge I had given them, but there would be outsiders who would seek to add the voice of tradition and reason to my teachings. My words would be so distorted that eventually they would no longer reveal the original truth I had brought the world. And still, it was only to the level of truth that they understood, which they didn't have the truth that Christ brings forth in the letters. When I told them that this would happen, they were upset, even panic-stricken. I was relieved to see that my teachings had not been in vain after all. They had not entered totally deaf ears. They asked me to tell them more, but I raised my hands and said that that was all I could say. At this point, I felt I had said all that I ever wanted to say while on earth, that my speech with men had been accomplished. All I greatly, deeply desired was to retreat into silence and find peace and comfort in my contact with the Father. We left the supper room and walked to the Mount of Olives, but the mood of my disciples was one of inner conflict, fear, and doubt. Most of them left to join their families and friends who would still be celebrating their own Passover. In the garden, there was a special boulder shaped like a little cave. I liked it to shelter in from the wind. And so I sat and meditated and prayed, seeking a way into the exalted harmony I had enjoyed in the past. I knew that when I moved into attunement with the Father love, my fears would dissolve, and I would be in a state of total and absolute peaceful confidence again. So I want to say, because it's been misquoted, misunderstood, and mistaught, misinterpreted, he did not go in to say, take this cup from me. He's not going in to cop out. He's going in to say, we are finishing what we have begun. And I will do it to the end, and I will do it from the place of power of knowing who I am. Only a loving God could say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And the truth of that is true for everyone that we judge. They don't know what they're doing. In accordance with our beliefs and our understanding. They're doing it in accordance with their beliefs and their understanding. So I knew that when I moved into attunement with the Father love, my fears would dissolve and I would be in a state of total and absolute peaceful confidence again. As I felt the power of love move into me and possess my human consciousness, so did the strength to endure what lay ahead possess my heart. I would be able to remain within the love and give the love to others to the very end. And so it was. I will not even attempt to re-enter into the trial and crucifixion state. It is of no consequence. When I finally died on the cross and my spirit withdrew from my tortured body, I was lifted into ineffable and radiant light. I was enclosed in the warmth and comfort of love, such as I had never experienced before. I had a sensation of enveloping praise, a powerful assurance of work well done, of ecstasy in universal strength to continue the work, and to continue the joy, and to continue the rapture, which is far beyond any that can be felt on the earthly condition. I moved into a new and wondrously beautiful way of life, but I still descended in consciousness to remain in touch with the people, to remain in touch with the people I had left behind. I was able to show myself to those who were sufficiently sensitive to be able to see me. And I hear stories of that often in my life, and you probably have too. Maybe you've even experienced it, that people have actually felt and seen Jesus. So, however, the story of Thomas, who supposedly fingered my wounds, is nonsense. My disciples did not know that I had secretly arranged with Joseph of Arimathea to take my body to his own unused tomb after my death, where he would anoint it according to custom before the sun set. Then, when darkness had fallen and the Sabbath was being observed by everyone in Jerusalem, assisted by 2 mounted trustworthy servants, he would take my body secretly by during the night and by out-of-sight tracks during the day to a mountainside outside of Nazareth in Galilee. There, further assisted by my family, if he followed my directions, he would find a small hidden cave which had given me shelter from storms and a refuge from people when I was young, unhappy and rebellious, and at odds with the world. Back in the days before the desert, Joseph promised to find the cave from a map I had given him and to leave me there after further embalming. He would build up the small entrance to thoroughly block it from intruders. There my body has rested free from molestation. It has been said of me that my body rose from the dead. What an absurdity, conjured up by earthly minds, which were at a loss to satisfactorily explain my death as a felon on a cross. What need would I have of an earthly body to continue existence in the next dimension? How could such a ridiculous myth persist even into the 21st century? It has been a measure of lack of understanding of Christians that they have blindly accepted such dogma to this very time. Think about this carefully. Having been released from an earthly body, and after my experience of the ecstasy and glorious rapture of passing into a higher dimension of universal consciousness, why would I want to return to the earthly dimension to enter my body again? Of what use would it be to me, in your world or in mine? While in the physical substance of my body might be spiritualized when perfectly attuned to the Father love consciousness, while I was still lived on earth, would not my body be an encumbrance and a deterrent to my subsequent journeys within the highest spiritual kingdoms? So I take us back to a few pages before the 8s, where Jesus asked, is it true that I walked on water? He told us of his spiritual meditation, took him to this place where basically the disciples could see him, but he wasn't the physical body. He didn't have the weight and the density of the physical body. So this is probably what, if anything, they saw, if they saw him rise, you know. So, and again, what we sow is what we reap. So if this is what they intended to see, this is what they saw. Okay, visible things are but a manifestation of specific frequencies of vibration and consciousness, which produces a shimmer of motes or particles, giving an appearance of solid matter. So again, going back to the desert, nothing is solid, Christ taught us. Each visible substance possesses its own unique vibrational frequency. A change in the rate of vibration produces a change in the appearance of matter. As consciousness energies change, so do the appearances of matter change. This is how Jesus did his healing. He knew that matter wasn't solid, and he claimed a different idea to whatever the healing was, and the idea of the individual received that and made the shift in the motes to change it. It all comes from within. Jesus said that often. I didn't do it. Your faith, your belief is what did it. Therefore, it was possible for me to focus and lower my frequencies of consciousness to that point where my form became visible to the human eye. I could return to my disciples and be seen by them. And I did so. I loved them more than ever before and owed them as much comfort and support as I was able to give them following my death. Not only this, it was necessary to direct my own power into their minds in order to give them the impetus and courage to continue the work I had started. I know that was very choppy, but I hope you can hear it. I'll try to read it. I'm not having difficulty with it. I think as I'm reading it, I'm just really experiencing it as Christ is speaking. I'll take a drink, see if that helps, okay? Thank you. Therefore, it was possible for me. So he's saying he didn't have a body, but it's possible for him to come into form and then release that form back. So he would come back periodically and show himself to the disciples, and with that bring to them the mindset, the consciousness that he possessed, and encompass them and encase them in this mindset so that it would expand their own of what they were understanding. They still couldn't get it. The mindsets were still limited, but they were still getting it more and more to try to teach it. And to this day, we're still, and there are those who have these miracles happen because there are those who have connected with the true Christ of Jesus, the true Father. Okay? However, I want you to know that the individualized consciousness, which has ascended in vibrational frequencies, to the very portals of the universal creative dimension becomes light individualized. In other words, even though Christ is still expanding out as an individual, he's becoming an all-encompassing individual of inclusivity, but he's still going out, finding more of itself, kind of. So it's like, this process of universal and infinity keeps expanding itself, because it's only limited by my and your imagination, and our imagination keeps growing bigger and bigger and broader, creating more good. So I'm going to reread this because it's so powerful to really feel this. I want you to know that the individualized consciousness, which has ascended in vibrational frequencies to the very portals of the universal creative dimension, becomes light individualized. Can you imagine light being individualized? You can see bulbs in a room of light, but where does the light stop? Light individualized. An individualized consciousness, which needs no body, no barriers, no walls, no limitations in which to express. And I in this ever-expanding essence of consciousness, to the highest spiritual realms. It is glorious consciousness. And through this glorious consciousness, can I imagine the highest spiritual realms. It's always more love. It is a supreme and enraptured state of being, having none of the needs, desires, impulses experienced by those who have not fully mounted high beyond and above the ego. While living on earth, your minds remain anchored within certain parameters of vibrational frequencies, imprisoned in bodies in which have their own needs. If your consciousness were to truly soar beyond these parameters, your earthly self could disappear. When I was trapped in a body, I was also largely confined to these parameters of vibrational frequencies and consciousness. Furthermore, imagination alone can soar no further than your previous experiences, and therefore you are confined to your past, which you project into your future. However, little by little, you'll be led by those minds which are sensitive enough to access the higher spiritual dimensions and can thus move beyond your present consciousness boundaries. We, this is why community is so important. This is what we do with each other. We raise our own consciousness frequencies or vibrations. And because we've allowed the Christ to be in the midst of us, it is the more consciousness that brings us even higher. We will record for those wondrous experiences and states of being beyond your own, to which you yourselves will then be able to aspire. In this way, you go forwards in the levels of steps of spiritual development. Each step brings you a higher vision of what can be achieved, and out of this vision, you formulate a new goal. With this new goal ever before you, you work to cleanse yourself of the contaminating influence of the bonding rejection impulses of your earthly existence. Step by step, you transcend your ego. And we're not to kill the ego or hate the ego or resist the ego even. The ego is a part of us. The ego, we are to enlighten the ego. We are to let the ego be comfortable with itself. And as we allow that, we allow it to grow into the truth that it knows. I am perfect. That's what the ego wants, to be perfect and see everyone else as imperfect. But the Christ ego sees itself as perfect and sees everyone and everything else as perfect. So we're to bring the ego up into its Christ expression. We're to educate it, and that's what Christ has come for. This is the master's course of self-mastery. It's a course in teaching us that we are the creator of our bodies and our experiences. So step by step, we transcend our ego. Transcend, transmute, transition, feed and nurture it with the food that brings it away from separation into oneness and unity. When or as you transcend, it's not an overnight thing. It can be, I'm sure. It took Jesus 40 days in the desert. It's taken me 77 years and still moving. It's taken all of us wherever we are. So it's it's a transcendence, it's a process. As we transcend our ego and it dies within our consciousness, we are now abundantly alive with the Father Love consciousness. We've replaced the lower consciousness with higher consciousness. We no longer think in those lower patterns of vibration because we have ascended into the all-inclusive love. So we embrace the allness. And when I react against that, when I separate myself from that, I know I have work to do. I go into meditation and I come back into the inclusivity of all that is. To enable you to reach these pinnacles of love, joy, harmony, and rapture, I lived, worked, and died in Palestine. And I have come to you now, in 2000 AD, in these letters. Let not my work be in vain the second time. As you read these pages, as you seek, as you meditate and pray for inspiration, you'll come to feel the Father's response. And if you listen every day attentively, you will hear the Father's voice. It may be in colors, maybe in feelings, it may be experiences, maybe a commercial on television or some media, maybe in a book you read, it may be in a conversation you overhear or even participate in. But we're always hearing the Father love, because that's when that's all we're looking for, when that's all we're seeking, that's all we can find. This voice with a capital V is ever with you. Dismantle the barriers created by self-will. Open yourselves to receive strength, power, inspiration, and love directly from the Father Love consciousness. Read and reread these letters, that they may eventually become absorbed into your consciousness. As you do so, you'll be journeying towards light, and you'll radiate light to others. Such light is not just light, as is electricity, but it's the very nature of universal consciousness, which I described to you in my letter 1. Therefore, as you radiate the light, you'll radiate unconditional love. You'll promote the growth and spiritual development of every other living entity. You'll yearn to nourish and nurture. You'll work to promote protection and healing and education. You'll long to assist in the establishment of loving law and order, in which all will be able to live harmoniously, successfully, and prosperously. You will be in the kingdom of heaven. And I would say we are the kingdom of heaven. At the same time, let there be no illusions. As steps are taken to introduce these letters to the outside world, there'll be exactly the same recriminations, the same condemnation, the same talk of Satan, the devil, as there was when I first taught in Palestine. Take heart. Pray for courage. Those who endure to the end will rise above the turmoil and the violence, and we will rest in the peace and joy of the kingdom. It's all a choice. And so there's something I read. Oh, I don't see any resistance to these letters, okay? I see these letters coming to people in a transition where it's going to go into the grassroots of Christianity, and I think it's also going to go in the top echelons of Christianity. So I think the grassroots and the echelon are going to come together with the same truth, and we're going to see the culmination, the unity of no more separation. That even with Christendom, there are sects and there are so-called cults. Okay, even in this, those differences, the walls of those differences are going to break down, and it's just going to be acceptance. And we will all be seeking the same truth, the Father, the Father Love Consciousness, and we will come from that. So the end of this letter, in the original manuscripts, I always like to read this piece. It's been eliminated from everything that's printed and published since the Christ Returns Speaks His Truth first publication. And this to me is very important to hear, because I feel, especially after reading what we just read. So the end of letter 3 in the original manuscript says, "It is my, Christ's, dearest longing these letters should be swiftly publicized and distributed to people seeking truth. If quoting from my letters, please state the source very clearly. Christ's Letters from Christ's Way, www.christsway, spelled out CHRISTSWAY.co.za." So I thank you for being with me during this time. I trust this letter and this recording and this reading has been encouraging and empowering for you. And may it make the difference in your life that Christ wants it to make. I'm honored that we've had this time together, and I thank you for your time. God bless you. And may you be blessed for the rest of this day, this week, this month, this year, the year of peace on earth, 2018. God bless.